really delighted to be sharing tonight with such an amazing lineup of speakers. We've got my federal parliamentary colleagues, Janet Rice. Hi, Janet.
Hello, Adam. Lovely to be here.
And Richard De Natale as well. And of course, the leader of the Victorian Greens, Sam Ratnam. Hi, Sam.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Adam. Hi, everyone out there.
Great. Thanks for all joining us. I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you here from Wurundjeri country and acknowledge that we are on what always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and especially acknowledge the significance of that at the moment and the really important protests that are coming up over this weekend as Indigenous and people in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here, say, express their solidarity, as you can as well over the weekend, expressing solidarity with what is happening in the United States and the call for racial justice there, but also acknowledging that just as we fight for it to be for action, racial justice and the end to oppression overseas, we've also got to draw attention to the high number of black deaths in custody that we have here at home, and the fact that we are still seeing, only a couple of days ago, young Indigenous Australians being picked up and harassed and abused on the streets and treated in ways that when you look overseas, you can see the kind of responses that it's happening. So we've got it happening here as well, and it's all up to us to all do something about it and to start by calling it out. But what we also want to talk to you about tonight is the various crises that we're facing and what it means to to chart a pathway out of it, and why the Greens are pushing for a Green New Deal and for our recently launched Invest to Recover recovery plan that has at its core this simple idea. We're facing a number of crises at the moment. We've got the climate crisis, where we've got to take action in the next 10 years. Otherwise, dangerous global warming may be locked in and may be irreversible during the lifetime of today's primary school students. And they could be witnessing a planet that goes from 7.5 billion people down to 1 billion people during the course of today's primary school students' lifetimes. We've got an inequality crisis where you've got inequality at 70-year highs in this country, and we've got a jobs crisis where young people, like for a long time now, either haven't been able to find enough work or haven't been able to find decent work in this country. And of course, we've now got the economic crisis that has been induced by the coronavirus, which is, again, hitting young people hard. Women have lost their jobs at rates faster than men and lost their hours of work. And we are seeing sectors like arts and the creative sector, and childcare and universities really taking a massive, massive hit, and some of them potentially going to the wall. And the question is, how are we going to get out of it? And you've got Scott Morrison saying the answer is to fund people to put in granite bench tops, give out granite bench top grants at the same time as you've got 116,000 people homeless in Australia. And you've got the Labor Party out there today complaining that, well, it's a bit inconsistent because it doesn't include lap pools, for example. Well, like, you know, great. If that's the contribution from the Labor Party is to get it extended to lap pools, then we're all going to be fine, aren't we? But we've got these big, big crises. We've got a lot of people who are saying we're going to be out of work and we're just desperate to contribute to tackling the climate crisis and making Australia a creative place. And you've got the ability for government to step in and say, well, let's put 2 and 2 together and let's use government investment to get us out of here. Let's make sure that we build the social housing homes to house the homeless and the people on the housing waiting list. Let's make sure that we've got free education for everybody. So during this time of downturn, you can use your, you can reinvigorate and get your skills back up. And make sure that when we come out of it, that we're contributing. We could get to 100% renewable energy with a bit of government investment. And we could do it all and still end up with debt levels less than comparable countries, and Australia would get some lasting benefit out of it. That's the idea behind the Green New Deal. It stems from a thing called the New Deal, where in the US, they got out of the Depression by saying government's got to show the way out. Government's got to make sure that everyone who's got a decent job wants it. And they've ended up with things of lasting benefit to their country, that like the national park system came out of those New Deal initiatives. And now we want to do the same here. And we're really excited to talk to you tonight about what that might mean, and especially what it might mean for Victoria. And Sam, this is something that you and your colleagues have taken up and are pushing really hard, saying that there's opportunities here for Victoria if we go down the road of a Green New Deal.
That's right. Thanks very much, Adam. And hi, everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And just before answering that question, Adam, I thought we'd ask for some audience participation. And we're just going to put a poll out there. You've given people a pretty good overview, which is fantastic. But wanted to ask everyone who's joining us on this call, on this webinar tonight, do you know what a Green New Deal could mean for us? So we're going to put that poll up. You can answer it really quickly. It'd be good to see where everyone's sitting. Just got a couple of minutes. Hopefully that's appearing on his screen now. Look forward to seeing what you'll say. Excellent. All right. I think we're going to find out the results very soon. Okay. So we've got about 14% saying yes, absolutely. 63% saying got a fair idea. About 20% saying don't really understand it, and a few percent saying haven't got much of a sense of it at all. Thanks very much, everyone. That gives us a really good sense of where you're at the moment. So a lot of people have heard a little bit about it, have heard it being used, and that's what tonight is about giving you a bit more detail. And you're right, Adam, we've been at the state level. The Greens MPs are a team of 4 MPs, and I've been talking about what a Green New Deal could mean for Victoria. And one of the reasons we think it's really important to talk about it is we know Victoria is going to be particularly hard hit by what we've seen with the pandemic. We're in this together. We know we're facing this crisis across the world, but in places like Victoria, which is largely a service-based economy, we know that we've lost so many jobs already, and there's more to come, unfortunately. We know because of that our governments are going to be making some really big decisions about where to invest to rebuild the economy. So it's really important that we put ideas on the table, particularly before the state budget in October, which is just a few months away, about what things the government should be investing in that both will help create jobs and rebuild the economy, at the same time solve the big challenges, environmental and social challenges that we face. So as you talked about, that's what a Green New Deal in essence is about. So we've started putting those ideas on the table. There's kind of 6 areas that we've been talking about and want to talk more with people about, which is one of the reasons we're doing these types of webinars, to hear from you as well, to hear about your ideas. So 6 big areas we've been talking about. The first one is climate and the environment. We've made an announcement around a bushcare blitz, so restoring our precious natural environment with thousands of jobs in restoring our environment. And we know renewable energy as well is going to be a really big part. The climate crisis isn't going away. In fact, we know it's getting worse. So we're going to have to fast track our move towards 100% renewable energy, and we can do it right here in Victoria. And that will involve publicly owned renewable energy, but we should also be thinking about storage and all the things we know that are going to make our environment much safer and healthier for everyone. We're talking about housing. This is such an important area, like you've just talked about, what's happening right across the country. We've announced that there needs to be a big build of 100,000 new public housing homes. You know, we've got over 100,000 people on the waiting list in Victoria, waiting for urgent housing. We should be building homes for them, and we know it'll create more than 10,000 jobs. We also know that transport's a big area, so we've announced an idea for a massive investment in walking, bike riding, public transport. We also know that helps with social distancing, the things that we're going to have to do to emerge out of the COVID pandemic that's going to keep people safe. And we also know that creates thousands of jobs, also brings down our carbon emissions. So it's great for the economy, also great for our environment. And the next tranche of things that we're thinking and talking about, which we're really happy to talk more with everyone about, are looking at investing in things like the caring economy, small businesses and local economies, because we know they're really struggling, and also thinking about the waste and recycling revolution. So there's some of the areas that could be part of a Green New Deal. We think it's really important that governments now focus on those areas, help rebuild the economy, create jobs while solving the big social and environmental challenges of our time.
Now, it sounds really exciting, and people have obviously got a fair idea about what the Green New Deal is, but want to know more. And I really encourage you to jump into the chat box and ask some questions as we go along so that we can get to them. We'll have a chance for a bit of Q&A, and I sadly have to duck off in about 5 minutes to go to something else that's come up, but the rest of us are going to be here and really excited tonight about not just talking to each other and asking some questions of each other, but hearing from you as well. So please jump in with your comments in the chat section. I just want to pick up on housing, Sam, which you mentioned. We've got a homelessness crisis. We've got people potentially out of work. You could, and we've got a shortage of public housing. It seems to me, I think probably the economic term is no-brainer, like to say that if government stepped in and used this chance to build some more public housing, you'd not only be able to put people to work, but you'd be able to get lop off some of those huge public housing waiting lists that we're seeing too, right?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, we have over 100,000 people now waiting on the social housing register. So it's the wait list for public and community housing. That's a huge number. And we've seen that grown exponentially even in the last couple of years. Victoria, this is a really sad fact about Victoria, we invest the lowest in social housing. A Productivity Commission report actually found that. So we're spending the least, we're getting very, very poor outcomes. We have over 25,000 people who are homeless on any one night in Victoria. And one of the, luckiest and wealthiest places in the world, we're seeing this huge problem just grow and grow exponentially. So we have such a responsibility to tackle it. And so we've got an opportunity here as well now, because we know it also creates thousands of jobs, good, sustainable, long-term jobs. And you're thinking about, a long-term build, 100,000 over 15 years is doable and it could create that pipeline of jobs. We also know it's not without precedent. When we've had big economic challenges, post-World War II, the global financial crisis, governments have gone to housing as a way of stimulating the economy and creating that social good. So, like you said, it's a no-brainer. It makes sense on so many levels. And like you said, with what we've seen announced from the federal government today, the priorities are all wrong.
Yeah. Those big public housing tower blocks that you see around my electorate, where we've got the most of any of the electorates in Victoria, they're all built in the 60s, right? And population's gone up, but there hasn't been any new builds of those. And so as a result, we see people on the waiting list, people sleeping rough as well. So it's about time we built, and be a very good time to do it, as you say. Look, I think one thing that we've been trying to get across as part of the push for a Green New Deal is that a job, building a sustainable public housing job is a sustainable public housing is a green job, or putting up solar panels is a green job, but teaching is a low emissions job as well, and caring for each other in the care sector is a low emissions job too. And so one of the things that this has sort of brought home, I think, this crisis is a bit of it's brought home how much we probably don't think about and undervalue perhaps caring in our society and the care economy in particular. And I mean, do you agree with that? And I think what does it mean for the recovery plan? Like, how do we make sure that we regrow the care economy as well?
I absolutely agree with that, Adam. And I think we've seen through this pandemic just how integral our caring economy is to our well-being. To create a caring society, you have to invest in the caring economy. They've been the frontline workers who've kept us healthy, but also kept us well, in terms of social connection and community services, teaching and caring for children. I mean, this is all what we're talking about in terms of a caring economy. And unfortunately, it's been part of the economy, the community sector and the caring sector has been the most underfunded part of the economy and our society. Those workers have had the least security and stability in terms of the types of jobs. It's a very casualised workforce, relying on grant funding, which is very short term. And, you just have to look at the Mental Health Royal Commission that's happening in Victoria at the moment. We know there's such a significant problem that we've had to have a Royal Commission to investigate what's happening and how we improve it. So there's an agreement that we haven't done enough to support our caring sector workers. And so a part of this recovery post-COVID should involve investing in that sector, ensuring that those workers have greater security and stability, that we create more jobs as well, and we actually create more services. So I think expanding that part of our society is absolutely vital, and it means we have a more caring society, which is what the Greens want to see.
Excellent. And now I get the really good, the lucky bit at the moment of I get to duck out because I'm sorry, I've got to go to something else that's come up and leave all the questions with you. But I'm going to leave with one of them because someone's asked you a question, Sam. Any possibility of temporary bike paths on the road as has been done elsewhere? Someone said, I think these are all great ideas. What are the major parties' objections to the Green New Deal? And are there any lessons that we can take from our reduced carbon impact from our response to COVID? So some really great suggestions for everyone. And I'm going to hand you over to the people who are going to be able to answer them. So thanks for having me, everyone. And let's make a Green New Deal happen. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Adam. All the very best. So Adam threw us a number of great questions there. I'll answer only one very quickly because I want to go to Janet and Richard as well. Great question about the bike paths. So we've announced 300 kilometres worth of new bike paths. It was interesting, we were just in Parliament this week and I asked the Roads Minister why Victoria hasn't announced any significant investment in walking and cycling. You know, it's been underinvested in already prior to COVID, but COVID has just taught us just how much the way our cities work keeps us well and safe as well in terms of health-wise, social distancing. And they didn't have a very good response to why they haven't invested, said things might come in the future. So we'll be onto that. So that's why us putting some big ideas on the table helps push the government as they're going to be making some really big decisions over the next couple of months before the budget comes out as well. And so now I'd like to ask Janet and Richard some questions. And so touching on some of the things that we've announced for Victoria, your team, Janet, at the federal level, your MP team have announced the federal recovery plan and outlined plans and the vision that the Greens would like to see our governments talk about over the next few months. I'm really excited about what that plan could mean for new jobs in Victoria. And I was wondering if you could tell us more about the sort of investment in infrastructure that will be possible with the plans that the Greens have announced.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. And hello, everyone. It's so great to be here. And I see by the number of comments that are pouring in that we've got quite a lot of people online joining us tonight. So it's great to be able to be having this conversation with people probably right across the country, not just in Victoria, I suspect. I did want to start also by acknowledging that I am here on Wurundjeri land at home in Footscray, and to acknowledge that it's stolen land, and particularly to be standing in solidarity with our First Nations peoples at this time of such focus on the injustices that Indigenous peoples and people of colour all around the world are currently facing. So sustainable infrastructure, it's a really big part of our Invest to Recover package and a big part of what a Green New Deal looks like. And it makes sense, and it's the sort of stuff that makes me so proud to be a Green, that we can keep on championing what's needed to really transform the way our cities and our regions work, and to be investing at the same time as creating lasting infrastructure that we need to be having a clean, green economy, and to be creating jobs, which is obviously the critical thing that we need to be doing in this recovery from COVID. So our sustainable infrastructure package basically talks about spending $59 billion over the next 4 years. So it's a pretty hefty amount of money, but it's such a good investment. And it's the sort of investment it's governments that need to make this investment. Now is the time to be borrowing money. Basically, interest rates are next to zero. We can be borrowing this money and investing it in infrastructure that's going to last us for decades. The same way that, our rail lines in Melbourne were established 100 years ago or more, and they have continued to last us all of this time. This is the sort of investment that we can be making now. And so that $59 billion would be spent on a range of things. Public transport investment. And so we're talking about having an investment of at least to the order of 10 to 15 billion over the next 4 years, and up to 25 billion over the next 10 years, to be able to be investing in projects like the Metro 2 tunnel, so that we can actually have an efficient public transport system like Airport Rail, like Doncaster Rail, but also the other projects that aren't so, big and huge, things like having really good, efficient bus services right across the city, really good, efficient regional public transport as well, connecting up regional communities with the city and with each other, and also investing in electric buses so that we can be shifting our whole transport system to a zero carbon economy. So you can have basically investment in the public transport, shifting vehicles to electric vehicles, including those electric public transport vehicles, and then of course also doing the investment in active transport. And in fact, watch this space. We're about to have a bit of an announcement tomorrow, or just refocusing on the fact that calling upon the federal government to invest in walking and cycling. They're happy to put lots of money into big road projects, but when it comes to investing in cycling, they say they can't do it. Just interrupt got my cat here with me, Trieste. She loves me being home. She's a very cuddly cat. And so we're basically calling on the government to be spending $1 billion on bikes and walking over the next 4 years, which will enable to connect up those bike paths, to get them to where people need to go, and so that people feel that they can ride free, they can ride safe, and really feel confident about sort of getting on their bikes, and also dealing with accessibility issues, so that creating paths that are accessible for people with disabilities, upgrading infrastructure at public transport stations to be getting accessibility dealt with as well. So that's in terms of the transport, the city infrastructure. We've also got sort of a big fund for our grid transformation, so that we can really unleash our clean energy potential in Australia. And by the government spending around about $6 billion on transforming the grid, will enable sort of much more generation of renewable energy right around the country. And that's going to be the case just as much, in Victoria, right across the country. And all of this, of course, creating jobs. I mean, with that $59 billion, we estimate there's probably 260,000 jobs that would be created over the next 4 years, and about 61,000 of those jobs in Victoria. So it's just massive. It just, as Adam said earlier on, it's the sort of stuff that really is a no-brainer.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Janet. And you're absolutely right. That has an impact and effect on every state and territory. So what we're talking about at the federal level, and we can see what it will mean for Victoria as well. And yes, you're right, they're big investments of money, but they're the quantums our governments are thinking about. They're spending already. What we don't want them to do is spend on projects that are dirty and polluting and actually take us backwards, the things that will actually take our societies forwards. So
exactly. And if you look at the announcement for the last couple of days of the $600 million on the Granite Bench top grants, if you're going to afford to be spending money to be supporting people who've already got a lot of money to be renovating their houses that they've already got, that's the sort of money we should be just pouring into our sustainable infrastructure.
Absolutely. While I've got you here, Janet, there was a big decision around our environment recently, so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that before we'll move on to Richard. So big news last week in Victoria with the federal court ruling about that logging laws are pushing threatened species to the brink of extinction. What do you think this ruling means, and what's next in the campaign to protect our forest and endangered species?
Well, basically, the ruling is the finding of the court finding by the federal court by Justice Mortimer was absolutely huge. It had been described as the Franklin Dam decision for our threatened species, and that's what it is for our forest-dependent species that are at the moment. So many of them, sadly, sort of just really being pushed to extinction. The leadbeater's possum, greater glider, all of the owls, the powerful owl, the sooty owl. What this court finding last week said was that logging of our native forests basically is being done illegally, and that our threatened species aren't being protected. And it said that our logging laws aren't being complied with. So essentially the current logging operations have to operate under our regional forest agreements, which has up until now given them this broad exemption so that otherwise the conditions of our environment protection and biodiversity laws don't apply. What Justice Mortimer's finding last week said was, no, that's not the case. If you are damaging the habitat and threatening threatened species, well then the logging operations need to comply with our environment laws just the way like any other extractive industry. So it's huge. It means not just for the 41 areas of forest that they were seeking to directly protect, but it gives now a precedent for forest areas right across the country where there are logging operations that are impacting upon threatened wildlife. And basically that's every logging operation in the country. So in Victoria, really what the Andrews government needs to do is to just acknowledge the time's up. That logging of our native forests is just so last century. It is not what we need to be doing now. We've got almost 90% of the wood that comes out of Australia is already coming from plantations. It's time to make that 100%. And so I think as well as the legal implications, the political implications of this finding are massive, because Premier Andrews just needs to be told, come on, just the game's up. It's time to get out of native forest. Otherwise, you're just going to have legal action after legal action after legal action, interfering with those already totally unsustainable, totally uneconomic, totally with no social license, destructive logging operations. So I'm really excited. It's in terms of me as a forest campaigner, it's the biggest thing, the biggest win we have had in forest campaigning for 2 decades. So it's massive.
Thanks so much, Anna. That gives us a really good insight into what's happening at the moment. It is really a significant decision, and it highlights that, one, we've got to keep our eyes on some of that, the big environmental and climate kind of events that are happening, to move away, because often the excuse that's given by governments in terms of their investment in logging is saying, oh, we can't transition workers and that part of the economy fast enough. But at the same time, here we are putting big ideas for how you invest in the environment that actually creates jobs for the future and protects the environment.
Exactly.
So that decision, coming at a time when we're talking about huge environmental restoration programs, is really interlinked, isn't it? Kind of that.
Exactly. And so I meant to add, because, we do need to look after the people that are being employed in these extractive industries at the moment, but we can, and our Investor Recover plan said, look, spend $6 billion on a habitat fund, and that would create many more jobs than native forest logging in areas like environmental restoration, weed and pest control, establishing tourism infrastructure, establishing bike paths, cycling trails through the forests, all sorts of things that will be much more sustainable and a much healthier and diverse regional economies into the future.
Thanks so much, Janet. And I'm going to head over to ask a couple of questions of you, Richard. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. And we're so lucky we get kind of a range of perspectives here. Your perspective in the political world and seeing how some of these big public policy decisions are made, but also the perspective that you bring in the health side. So seeing it from what's happening in terms of a pandemic, in terms of the health response, and then the health and the public policy response. So I was going to ask you if you could give us a bit of an update about what the health situation in Australia is and around the world regarding COVID. Oh, just muted, Richard. Just need to unmute.
I'm really starting to feel like an old man with this technology. I really am. My children, 9 and 12, are running rings around me, and I thought it would never happen to me, but it has. I've become like my dad with the VCR. Anyway, let me begin by acknowledging, really strongly echoing your comments, Janet, and Adam's earlier about, it's never been more important for us to stand in solidarity with First Nations people right now. And I want to really pay respects to the land on which we all meet in respective parts of the country tonight. Yes, look, I sort of think of the response in health terms as a short-term and long-term health response. It's sort of the discussion's framed around health versus the economy, but I like to think of it as the short-term acute emergency response and the long-term response, which is really what the economic response is, because it will shape people's long-term health outcomes. And you know, the economy is there to serve us. So we should be thinking of both the acute response and the long-term changes that we're making right now and what that's going to do to people's health. What we do know, obviously, is that this virus, while viruses might not discriminate, the impact of this, you know, shocking pandemic is that people on low incomes, we know in the US, African Americans are disproportionately affected, and we know that the economic impacts also aren't shared equally. In the short term, I think the government's got a lot of the big calls right, and I think they've done that because it's been driven by the public health community. This is one of those areas where they're actually listening to the people who they need to be listening to, at least in the early stages of this pandemic. And that was in part because we saw at a state level, I think, a lot of pressure coming to bear on the federal government, and their initial response was good. The border controls and many of the other sort of restrictions have been proportionate and timed well. Testing has broadly been done properly. There have been some stuff ups along the way, and every time Morrison opened his mouth early on and talked about going to the footy and so on, he made things worse. But broadly, the acute response has been a good one. We're still at risk of a second wave, and the reality is that the only way we'll get through this in the way that we have so far is with strong international border controls. So international air travel will be restricted for a long time. We've got a very good contact tracing network, and we're going to be able to, I think, deal with localised transmission very quickly. So that's, I suppose, the issues then come, what's next? And for Australia, given that we're in a very different situation to many other countries where there's been very significant community transmission, we're very dependent on a vaccine. And it's challenging to see a pathway through this without a vaccine that doesn't involve still very significant restrictions for a country like Australia, because we've been very successful initially. The government's again made some mistakes along the way. They weren't prepared with the protective equipment in the way that we needed to, but they weren't alone. It's a good reminder about needing manufacturing capacity to build things like ventilators when we need to. It's a very good reminder about how important it is to support multinational institutions like the World Health Organization, and what the US has done there has been shocking. The WHO has made some mistakes, but we do need a very well-coordinated, cohesive global response to global issues like this and many others. We in Australia, I think, are now looking at implementing measures that I'm really worried about in terms of what they're going to do for people's long-term health outcomes. And the housing issue is a very good example where we could have funded a massive boost in infrastructure for public housing, and it's absolutely critical in Indigenous communities, but it's critical right around the country. And we could have funded what is health infrastructure and dealt with, improved people's health as well, because all of these things, education, healthcare, employment, are very important social determinants that impact on people's health. So I think my concern with the housing package today is that we've missed an opportunity and contributed to inequality, which is a major health issue. Look, I'll stop there. I just hope now that we have the opportunity to use this crisis to invest in the sort of infrastructure we know promotes good health, and obviously is so critical to make sure that we can live sustainably. And there's no more, I think, important issue for us now than to learn these lessons and chart our way through to a low carbon economy. That is the challenge that is more significant than what we've just faced. And we've seen what we can do if collectively we acknowledge a threat and we deal with it. And I just hope, and I know it's a hope, that we can do the same with climate change.
Thanks so much, Richard. And I know that's such an important perspective to have in terms of what we're doing in the future and how we're investing. I know that you've been talking about in terms of the federal recovery package, investment in CSIRO and publicly backed vaccine as well. And they're kind of all the kind of responses that we should be investing in, as opposed to some of the tangents that our governments are moving in as well, isn't it? So I'm going to hand over to Janet now, who's looking at some of the questions that are coming through then. There's lots of questions, so thanks everyone. I'm going to hand over to you, Janet. What's some of the questions coming through?
Thanks, Sam. Yes, so the huge number of questions have been coming through, and so we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but if we can give it a go and sort of have some short and snappy answers, hopefully we'll get through a few. The first one I'm going to ask is, Rod said, I'm in, but how do we convince the electorate that the Green New Deal is something that they should vote for? And I think that's a really good question, which I'm happy to start with the answer. And basically it's because I think we are giving the electorate that sense of hope that we can change things from the way that our economy and society are working at the moment, which is really dog eat dog, and looking after the government, looking after their corporate mates, looking after the people that are well off already. We've got people, and particularly after COVID, who are really struggling. They're not going to have a job. They're really going to be struggling to pay the rent, seeing that housing is owning their own house is completely off the agenda, increasingly feeling, alienated from society. And we are presenting a vision that is not just something that's a vision, but it's got some really tangible components of it that are going to really benefit people, whether it's free education, so the next gen guarantee, for example, of saying that every young person, we would guarantee that they can either have a job or a place at university or a guaranteed income to be able to live on. The public housing, so many things that will really speak to people's needs. And how do we do it? We do it the way that we've been doing it up until now. We just got to go out there and sort of have the conversations with people and let people know that the Greens are really caring about them and our environment. Did you two want to add anything, or should we move on to the next one?
Maybe just add quickly, I totally agree with you, Janet, and it's a great question as well. I think one thing that we've experienced over the last few months in these extraordinary times that none of us could have predicted, it's caused us to rethink everything. Our governments are making decisions that none of us would have thought a few months ago that would needed to be made and that they could make. Suddenly there was money to double, New Start, which was woefully inadequate, keeping people below the poverty line, but then they recognized that, acknowledged it, and they were able to double it. We saw it in Victoria. They found money to house people who were experiencing homelessness. And we know if they don't continue that, people will pour back out into the streets. So it is possible, and these solutions can be really effective.
Great. Okay, look, I'm going to throw the next one to you, Sam, as the leader of the Greens in Victoria. This is from Victoria. And what role do coal-dependent communities and workers like those in the Latrobe Valley have in the Green New Deal? Will these people have a voice in developing the Green New Deal?
We absolutely want that voice in developing the Green New Deal. And I think that's been, because we know that we're going to have to transition out of coal, but we're going to have to support those communities that have been dependent on those industries and those jobs, which is why you need to be able to plan before the crisis hits. We've asked the government multiple times, it's coming. Some of these coal-fired generated plants are closing down before the government will even acknowledge that they've had their day, leaving communities in the lurch. Places like the Latrobe Valley Authority, which aren't funded well enough to help with the transition, we're saying, let's invest there, support the local economies and the workers. And that's why having the plans that governments can take up, we've got costed plans, we've got really well-developed ideas, working with experts in the field to say, this is how you can do it. Here's a transition plan to get to 100% renewable energy. It is possible, but government, you're going to have to start thinking about it now. Don't wait till it's too late. So front and center of our mind are those communities that are really vulnerable to the fact that we're moving away from fossil fuels anyway, and we need to be able to support them. So absolutely welcome the voices, and really would welcome hearing from anyone who's got ideas and thoughts and would like to provide feedback.
And certainly I know with our the workshops that we're about to have in Victoria for the development of Green New Deal, we're going to have one that's particularly focused on regional and rural communities, and so be really working hard to get the voices, Latrobe Valley voices, in that workshop and throughout all of the workshops. Plus, and I think essentially the Green New Deal, as it's we've got some ideas, but we're going to be having this consultation, and it will evolve, and it's a massive thing, but it's going to be something that absolutely will only work when we've got voices from people right across the community being heard. Richard, I might throw this next one to you, given your background having worked with Indigenous communities. With regards to the creation of the Green New Deal, how much involvement have First Nations people been involved? It seems that there's a great opportunity to create a wonderful plan with proper collaboration and the inclusion of strong sovereign voices through all aspects of the Green New Deal. And that was from Stacey.
It's a good question. There are probably several avenues for that to happen. I don't know about the timetable, but I know that the roadshow is going right around the country. So I'm confident that Rachel Seward, given her long involvement in the territory, and she effectively represents us as Senator for WA and the NT, and she's done a mountain of work in that space. There's also, I think, through our own, within our own structures, there's the voice of the Indigenous community through a newly formed, it's now, I think, understand a more formalised role for a First Nations group feeding into our policy development process. So, and look, I'm very confident that Rachel, who has courage for this, as I said, in the WA and through her extensive networks within the Indigenous community, will have done a lot of work in that space. But share it as widely as you can, and through your own networks, and let people know that this is on, that it's happening, and that we really want to hear from as many people as we can.
Mm. And certainly I know that the Black Greens here in Victoria are intending to be quite involved with the workshops. So, yeah, and it's a beginning, and we really do want to be, centering the voices of First Nations peoples. Next one, which is from Tyler. Are there any lessons we can take from our reduced carbon impact from our response to COVID? One that comes to mind is more flexible working weeks to reduce commuting emissions. And I think it's a really good question. And as Sam, you said before, suddenly things that we didn't think were going to be possible have happened. We've all been working from home. There are a lot of things, a lot of people who have been doing it tough, but there have been some lessons and some things that people want to extend, beyond this COVID-19, to realise, hey, you can actually not have to be commuting into the office every day if you've got an office job, which will, have an impact on, the level of transport emissions. Plus, again, the airline industry has basically shut down. It's not going to continue like that post-COVID, obviously, but it does really raise the issue of, do we really need to be flying all around the place and all around the world as much as we were? And conferences that people have been flying, backwards and forwards, suddenly you discover that having Zoom online workshops is actually a good way of reaching a wider number of people and enabling more people to participate. So I think there are some lessons that we can learn. But I think the thing to bear in mind, though, is that even with all of the reductions in flying and in transport that have been experienced globally over the last 3 months, it's actually only put a tiny dent in the overall carbon pollution right across the world. And so that the structural change that's needed, the way that we generate our electricity, while people are still, heating their houses from fossil fuels, while you've got sort of manufacturing that's relying on sort of coal generated electricity, it's not going to make a big dent in it. So we've got to have those structural changes. What we've shown from the last 3 months is what can happen from individual changes through not travelling, but we need to have the structural changes to make the really big dents in reducing our carbon pollution. Mm-hmm. So I might move on. Oh, and this looks like it's another one for Richard from Toby. With the federal government indicating that they can address the COVID health emergency, is it time to start actually it's not a health, but you can still give it a go, either of you. Is it time to start reframing the climate emergency as a health risk? That's a climate and health issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a very powerful way of being able to connect, you know, what a sort of crisis that are in stark contrast when you look at the response, where you look at respect for expertise, and I suppose what it did to understand and appreciate is the fact that if we can get enough of a shift within the community on this, then we can act very, very quickly. We can act very quickly, and governments have shown that they can radically transform an economy in the face of a threat. And so I think as that for me gives me hope, but it also means that we've got to redouble our efforts and to make sure that when it comes to climate, people understand all of the dimensions of the threat that we're facing. And the threat that comes from climate when it comes to health is most people, I think, who are in the space understand, but most people outside of sort of our networks don't understand it. People, when we talk about, for example, the Black Saturday fires, we had more people die in the preceding heat wave than died actually during the fires, as catastrophic as they were. That was a climate-related disaster. So the impact of natural disasters like, or so-called natural disasters like fires, but particularly extreme weather events, extreme heat events here in Australia, the changing nature of some of the insect and vector-borne diseases that we're going to see, things like dengue fever and Ross River virus, and those things expanding across a wider geographic location. We're going to see massive increases in gastrointestinal illnesses because bugs like nice warm environments. So the health impacts will be very significant. And I agree with the way that question was asked, in that it's an opportunity for us to try and connect it to something that's much more personal for a lot of people and shift behaviour very quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And I know that there's been the recent study just showing how many more people died from the smoke from the fires over the summer than actually died, the 33 people who sadly died in the fires themselves. And so, yeah, those impacts are just going to absolutely multiply exponentially unless we tackle the climate crisis. Okay, we've got time for a couple more. So I'll throw this one to you, Sam. So this is Katie from Mildura, and she said, I'm keen to apply the Green New Deal to the local level in the upcoming local government election. Which parts would align most closely to be implemented at a local level?
Great question, Katie. I think, so particularly we look at the environment and climate, and we know local councils, local communities play a huge role in our environmental response. In fact, they've been leading the charge across the world. Cities have actually outpaced our state and federal jurisdictions in the type of action, the bold action they've taken. I used to be in local council as well, and it's such a big role that local councils and communities can play, reducing their emissions, helping transition their community emissions, helping getting solar onto both council and community buildings. I think transport is the other one. You know, I talked about walking and cycling parts, and you know, our local councils and communities have a lot of say over what the look and feel of a community is. And I think in terms of what we've seen in the pandemic response, as well as we've had a new appreciation of it. We've been stuck at home, we're walking in the streets more often, we're relying on our footpaths and nature parts and our bike parts to be able to get out and exercise. And when they're not there, it has huge health impacts as well as environmental impacts. So I think over the next few months, as we move towards a local council election here in Victoria, it's going to be really crucial to talk about what type of investments can local councils make in those areas of climate, environment, transport, but also the caring economy, community services that local councils are charged with providing to their community, and also what local communities need to be asking from their state and federal governments, because state and federal governments can't say, sorry, that's not our remit and we're going to leave it alone. They have a responsibility to provide funding and support to allow that to happen.
Thanks, Sam. I think we've got time for two more. So just a sort of quick answer to this one, which is from Helen. Thinking about jobs in the future, what are the Greens' thoughts regarding increasing manufacturing in Australia? And basically, yes. And it's certainly in our Investor Recover package, it's a really strong thread of that, of increasing manufacturing, and that we've got the potential to really be supporting it through government procurement policies. So basically governments to be purchasing things that are manufactured here in Australia that are done sustainably with good worker conditions and created locally. And I think it's another element of our Investor Recover and our whole platform is investing in research and innovation to be supporting really smart manufacturing and really high-end, high-tech manufacturing. At the moment, we are right down the bottom of the pile of the OECD for how much money we spend on research and innovation, so that we've got the Investor Recover package basically outlines and re-emphasises that we want to increase investment in research and development to 4% of GDP, up from 2% at the moment. And that would be, including big investments into CSIRO, into the Australian Research Council, the cooperative research centres, to really be kickstarting and supporting manufacturing. Did either of you want to add anything more to that?
That's great. It's all good.
Okay. And then look, the last question, and we'll perhaps get all three of us to answer it really quickly. It's a broad one, is if the Greens could only pass one bill through Parliament that they could all put all of their weight behind, what would it be? So,
that's a big question. That is a tough question. There's so many great things that we can do, but just talking about the climate crisis that we're in as well, which we know is not going away. We're going to have to, we have to tackle this. And there is this moment now when, as we've talked about, governments are investing huge amounts of money to rebuild the economy, create thousands of jobs to stem the tide of what we're seeing. Our country's moved into recession. We haven't faced economic times like this for decades. So this is the time to be investing in renewable energy and taking climate action. And imagine what the world could look like if our governments right now put those billions of dollars into transitioning our economy to be a cleaner economy. Yeah, it'd be amazing.
Thanks, Sam. Richard?
Oh, well, this pandemic has been awful, but, at the end of the day, to be frank about it, the world will go on without us, but we're facing a threat that's going to wipe out and, drastically alter all life on Earth. And if we don't do something about that soon, it won't just be humans, but everything else that exists on this little planet with us that's going to suffer. So we've got to get climate sorted. So it has to be climate. And what does that look like? Well, implement the Greens policy agenda would be the name of the bill.
We had one more suggestion, I think, in the chat box, an omnibus Green New Deal bill. That's good policy thinking out there.
And for me, very much, actually legislating to tackle our climate emergency. And in fact, I was reflecting, I said it in my first speech, that when I'm in the Senate, I want to see us legislate to have turned the corner to be heading towards a zero carbon economy, and to be doing that in a just way, and sort of a just transition, and making sure that transition to a clean green future happens in a way that supports people and is done in a way that really works for all of us, as well as for all of the creatures that we share this planet with. And we can do it. It's very, very possible. And that's exactly what we're working for. So look, thank you everyone. This has just really been a beginning of the discussion about the Green New Deal and the ideas that the Greens are putting out there and putting on the table. As I mentioned before, we've got some consultation workshops that are underway. In fact, we've got 4 workshops planned across Victoria over the next couple of weeks, and we would love to have people involved in them. Unlike tonight, where you've heard a lot from us, those consultation workshops will be hearing from you, because we've got some ideas of what needs to be in a Green New Deal, but we want to hear from you as to what you want to see in it. I think the links are going to be put in the chat box so that you can click on them and register straight away. But the 4 workshops are on next Tuesday, the 9th, in the evening, then Saturday, the 13th of June in the afternoon, Sunday, the 21st of June in the afternoon, and Thursday, the 25th in the evening. And I think the 25th is particularly for young people, and the 21st is the one focused on rural and regional people. So we'd really love to see you involved in those workshops so that we can continue this conversation and make sure that our policy agenda and our platform and our inspirational things that we are taking to the Australian public are done together with all of us, and really are working to reflect what the desires and the hopes of all of us are. So it's been really great to be here. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Richard. Thanks to Adam, who had to leave. Thanks to our crew who put this all together. They worked so hard. And thanks to everybody who's been listening. Look forward to seeing you again, either online or maybe even in person at some stage down the track.
Thanks, Janet. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in.
Righto. See you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.